Freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed.
We must come see that the end we seek is a society at peace with itself, a society that can live with its conscience.
Faith is taking the first step, even when you can't see the whole staircase.
I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word.
No one really knows why they are alive until they know what they died for.
Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter.
Justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Forgiveness is not an occasional act, it is a constant attitude.
In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends.
Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter.
Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward.
There comes a time when silence is betrayal.
Those who are not looking for happiness are the most likely to find it, because the surest way to be happy is to seek happiness for others.
Only in the darkness can you see the stars.
Never forget that everything Hitler did in Germany was legal.
Faith is taking the first step even when you don't see the whole staircase.
You must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope.
We must live together as brothers, perish together as fools.
My name is Henry. I am the pastor of Heritage Presbyterian Church, and on behalf of our congregation, we'd like to welcome all of you, to this celebration of the life and the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
Thank you, Reverend Henry's son, for hosting our 4th annual Benicia Martin Luther King Day celebration. And thank you to everyone at Heritage Presbyterian Church for welcoming us to your worship home, and to many of you particularly added your talents and skills and energy to bringing us all together tonight. It makes a statement that's important, that we are all here to pause, to remember, and to reflect on this national holiday. Obviously, we didn't forget because we're all here, but many people do forget that this is a national holiday, and it's not just another day off. We are here to remember the man, Martin Luther King, the movement he began, all those who joined him. Ask ourselves how his teachings and his courageous demonstrations, speaking out, taking action, can embolden us and lead us to ensure that his legacy is a living legacy, and that the spirit of his work continues and grows where it is needed in many corners of our society and our culture. I would like to thank Jimmy Jackson, the president of the NAACP chapter in Vallejo, and Rochelle, the vice president, Rochelle Jackson, for coming here and for stepping in at the last minute to read quotes, because we had a few no-shows. After a long day of their event, which I managed to get to this morning, and it was wonderful. So I know they're tired and in some ways spent. So I thank you extra special for coming to join us. And Mr. Jackson will share some thoughts about all the meaning of all of this for us today, later in the program. Now I would like to introduce Benicia's mayor, Elizabeth Patterson, who has lent her voice to many issues of social justice over the years that I've been here in Benicia, 8 years, and she was eager to participate tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, JD. I do want to thank the organizers, the Benicia Martin Luther King Day Committee, JD Montgomery, Pat Plant with Making Benicia Better, is that right? Well, start it where we can. Mary Susan Gast and Bobby Richardson, and of course the Reverend Henry and the Heritage Presbyterian Church. So I could give a speech about growing up in Southern California and being a member of the Presbyterian Church and going to school in Pasadena and Los Angeles and my journey of learning about race. And I always had an open heart and an open mind, but there was much to learn. And I wanted to cover that more from the voice of Luther King. So you're going to hear some similar, familiar quotes. I have to say I'm really humbled that so many people are participating here and tonight. This is really a wonderful turnout, and it's a wonderful expression of what I hold dear in about Benicia. So this is a chance for us to honor what I consider a great man and what most people consider a great man. And it's a very touching thing for me because after all, I was quite young and I grew up with him and I lost him, and it was a very painful experience. To honor a great man who transcended race to speak of freedom for all. I feel so proud of all of you and my city. And not because we've gotten to the finish line, but because we're on the journey together. And as Martin Luther King noted, he may not live to see that day, but he believed that he was making an impact on the world and that this country someday will live up to its credo. I want to see freedom from fear, freedom from want, freedom from hate, and freedom to dream. I know the strengths of people in Benicia who in many ways seek to ensure these freedoms. And I know the sadness of seeing hatred expressed, of bullies, of those who care about themselves more than our community, people who would be a barrier for the greater good for their own needs. Leadership is the generosity of spirit. Let me start with words of Michelle Obama, one of my very favorite people. She always says everything just perfectly. She is speaking to students at King College Prep in Chicago. And of the 2 lessons that she wanted to share, she said she learned a lesson about how to get through those struggles. That is, instead of letting your hardships and failures discourage or exhaust you, let them inspire you. Let them make you even hungrier to succeed. I feel shame that I did not leave school and join Martin Luther King in his organizing for justice and freedom. I didn't have a driver's license, but I could have taken a bus. But in Pasadena, if you don't remember the times, I do, the voices were loud of disapproval of Martin Luther King. And it took me a while to hear through that noise, to hear his voice and his inspiration. And so I've always related to the words of Amazing Grace that seem appropriate for me. I was once lost, but now found. 'Twas blind, but now I see. I want to share Martin Luther King's words with you because the thoughts have never been expressed better or with more inspiration, and you heard a few of those tonight. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. That means so much to me. I'm sure it means every bit as much to all of you. MLK wrote from the Birmingham jail that history is a long and tragic story of the fact that privileged groups seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. I'm sorry to say we are witnesses of that very thing this day. He wrote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And MLK, speaking at the Washington Mall and edited by me for my sensitivities as a woman, "Let us not wallow in the valley of despair. I say to you today, my friends, even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal. I believe that no singular person has so significantly influenced the social standing of a race of people and their treatment in society as Martin Luther King." And if you reflect on that thought, that is an amazing observation. MLK was an inspirational person of character with a dream to change the world. transcending racial barriers to influence us in a profound way. He was a man of outstanding moral qualities, truth, courage, and justice. He combined Gandhi's belief that nonviolence was not only the most ethical, but also the most effective form of social protest. With his sense of humor, Christ furnished the spirit and motivation, while Gandhi furnished the method. He answered spite with kindness, violence with words, hate with love. Let me repeat that. He answered spite with kindness, violence with words, and hate with love. He possessed extreme patience and persistence, invaluable virtue and fortitude. He felt with that the almost certain risk to his life. He persisted because he knew in his heart what he was doing was right and that he was going to make a positive impact on the entire nation. I would suggest to you the world. He was entirely dedicated to changing the way that African Americans were treated. And even if he couldn't achieve this goal in his own lifetime, he wanted to leave a legacy that would spark the tenacity to eventually reach his goal. He had a set of values of environmental, social, and economic justice and wanted to share them with the world to improve the way people live their lives. Heroes always act with character, although not self-righteously, because we are all too human. From the Birmingham jail, he wrote a letter in response to pastors, priests, and rabbis accusing him of being an extremist. He wrote, "But as I continued to think about the matter, I gradually gained a bit of satisfaction from being considered an extremist. Was not Jesus an extremist in love? Love your enemies, bless them that curse you, pray them that despitefully use you." MLK wrote, "I will stay in jail to the end of my days before I make a mockery of my conscience." Was not Abraham Lincoln an extremist? Quote, "This nation cannot survive half slave and half free." He continued, "So the question is not whether we will be extremist. What kind of extremists will we be? Will we be extremists to hate? Or will we be extremists to love? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice? Or will we be extremists for the cause of justice?" In closing, I quote Michelle Obama. I told you she was my favorite. Quote, "I am tired of living in a country where every decision that we've made over the last few years wasn't for something, it was because people told us we had to fear something. We had to fear people who looked different from us, fear people who believed in things that were different from us, fear one another right here in our own backyard. I am so tired of fear, and I don't want my girls to live in a country, in a world based on fear." MLK, with some affection, quoted a woman in Montgomery, Alabama, who rose up with a sense of dignity and with her people decided not to ride the segregated buses, and responded to one who inquired about her tiredness with, "My feet is tired, but my soul is rested." She was involved with Martin Luther King Jr.'s cause, using love to fix hatred and racism. Thank you.
Have you ever been involved in the great movements for social justice in any kind of way? If you marched, if you studied, if you did an art installation, how have we been involved? And if you want to just raise your hands if you were involved.
I grew up in Palo Alto, and my parents were very active in voter registration in East Palo Alto and other areas in Redwood City, and were involved with the American Friends Service Committee.
When I was 16, my adventuresome girlfriend convinced me to cut school one day, and we drove to San Francisco to hear Dr. King talk at St. Mary's Cathedral. What a day. It was the beginning of my life.
I coached students who competed in Martin Luther King Jr. speech contest.
Okay. And did we miss it?
Worked for the Jesse Jackson for President campaign in 1988 in Indianapolis, Indiana. And sometime later named my daughter's middle name as Martin.
I'm from Richmond, and my home church when I was coming up was Easter Hill United Methodist Church, and Dr. Martin Luther King came to our church, along with Thurgood Marshall as well.
Oh, he's a student at Boston University. He's working on his PhD in systematic theology. He's from Atlanta. He went to Morehouse while I was at Spelman. He's a very nice man. And I told him all about you. He really wants to meet you. Oh, Mary, I just don't have time to meet anybody. No, that's all right. I don't want to meet him. Oh, but Coretta, he's going to be a Baptist minister. What? A Baptist minister? Oh, they're boring, narrow-minded, and they wear black suits. I'm from the AME church, you know, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and we're quiet, and they are so loud. Oh, no, I definitely do not want to meet him. Oh, but Coretta, he's not boring. He's very well-spoken. You will like him. Just please. He told me he was quite cynical about the women around here. And he wants to meet someone with style and charm. All right. You could give him my phone number. Well, a few hours later, ring, ring. Hello, this is Coretta Scott. Oh, Coretta, this is Martin Luther King Jr., and I've been wanting to meet you. A mutual friend has given me your phone number, and she has told me so many wonderful things about you. When can we meet? Well, I have a full schedule, but on Thursday, I have a couple hours between classes. Maybe we could meet for lunch. Oh, I would like to do that. It usually takes me about 10 minutes to get to the conservatory from Boston University. I'll get there in 7. All right. Well, that Thursday, I put on a powder blue wool suit, buttoned up my black jacket, and waited outside my dormitory. And there he comes on the street in a green 1951 Chevy. And I get into the car, and I'm thinking, he's a little bit short. He's a little bit young. Actually, I find out he's 2 years younger than me. No, yeah, 2 years older than him. Yes. But we went on and had lunch at this restaurant about 4 blocks away from the school. And we talked about this and that and all about things going on in the world. And he was so surprised. I knew what was going on in the world, that my mind wasn't just into music. He was really surprised. And he kept staring at my hair and my face and just looking at me so intently. And then after lunch, we got back into the car. And at a stop sign, at a stoplight, he put his arm on the back of the chair and he looks at me and he says, Coretta, you have everything I want in a wife. How can you say that? You just met me. Oh, I could tell. You got personality, character, intelligence, and beauty. When can I see you again? Well, I'll check my schedule. Just give me a call later on. And that night, I could hardly sleep. Here's this man talking to me about matrimony on our first date. Oh, music is my first love. This is the 1950s. A woman gets married, she becomes a housewife and has children. She doesn't have a career. Oh. And you know, I had looked at him intently, making sure that he wasn't joking when he was talking about matrimony. But no, he was very serious. Well, we went out again on Saturday, and that night afterwards, he talked about matrimony again. And we kept going out. go bowling, go roller skating. He's a really good dancer. Ooh, he could do the foxtrot and the waltz, and he could do the jitterbug too. He told me that once he becomes a minister, that he's going to have to give up dancing. He also told me that when he becomes a minister, he wants to be a minister in the South. That's where his people needed him the most. South. Oh, I could already feel the shackles of Jim Crow back around my ankles again. Oh. But my sister liked him. Everybody liked him. And I realized I could be out on the stage singing, but my life was more than just on the stage. I had to make a difference. That's what my father had taught us. That's what my teachers had all taught us. So I made a decision to fall in love with Martin Luther King, Jr.
One of the things that Dr. King said just months before he died was that he didn't want to be remembered for all of his accomplishments, his Nobel Peace Prize, his degrees in theology, his leadership in many, many organizations and efforts. He said that at his memorial service, he wanted to be remembered as a drum major for justice. The drum major syndrome was something that was talked about a lot at that time, and it was talked about in a negative way, meaning somebody who was out in front and really enjoying the prominence of being out in front. But he said, if I'm a drum major, remember me as a drum major, not for myself, but for justice and for peace. Part of the commitment that we bring as we come together is to hold all of that in our minds and our hearts. Human aspect and that vision of justice and peace. When we come together, we strengthen one another in our resolve to not be turned away from that commitment. So in that spirit, I invite you to join in singing the next song on our program, which is Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Us Around.
Is a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We can no longer afford to worship the God of hate or bow before the altar of retaliation. The oceans of history are made turbulent by the ever-rising tides of hate. History is cluttered with the wreckage of nations and individuals that pursued this self-defeating path of hate. As Arnold Toynbee says, love is the ultimate force that makes for the saving choice of life and good against the damning choice of death and evil. Therefore, the first hope in our inventory must be the hope that love is going to have the last word.
When I speak of love, I am not speaking of some sentimental and weak response. I am speaking of that force which all of the great religions have seen as the supreme unifying principle of life. Love is somehow the key that unlocks the door which leads to ultimate reality. This Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Buddhist belief about the ultimate reality is beautifully summed up in the first epistle of St. John. Let us love one another, If we love one another, God dwelleth in us, and God's love is perfected in us.
June 18th, 1953. In front of my parents' great lawn in Marion, Alabama, where they now live, over 400 people gathered for Martin and my wedding. Daddy King, name we called his father, he officiated. After that wedding, we went back up to Boston. I had another year of school, and Martin had several more years to work on his PhD. That year, remarkable. I had a heavy load. I switched my major, not my major, but my graduate studies from music performance to music education. Because now, as his wife, I know that I'll be teaching piano and violin and voice lessons and things like that. And so I had a lot of work to catch up. So Martin, he was really remarkable. He liked to put on my apron. He said it made him feel more like a man when he wore my apron. Every Thursday night, he cooked dinner. Ooh, and he could put his foot in it too. Fried chicken, greens, cornbread, pig's feet, pig's snouts, pig's ear. Ooh, he was a really good cook. And he did the laundry too. We didn't have no wash machine and dryer. So he did the laundry. He did a lot of the chores that first year of our marriage until we got caught up with so much other things later on. I was hoping that we'd be able to be in the North for maybe a year or two so I could get my musical career off the ground. But even by January, 2 churches in the North called him, 2 churches in the South called him. A dean of a school wanted him. They wanted him to be a dean of another college, and then the 2 other colleges wanted him to teach, all in the North. But Dexter Avenue Baptist Church was looking for another minister, and they invited Martin to come and preach. And when he came back that January, he knew this is where he needed to be. Ooh. But I prepared myself. After I graduated in June, in September, we had moved into the parsonage at Montgomery, Alabama, Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Oh, but we had a good year that first year. A really good year where Martin's sermons weren't sermons about life on earth, just accept all the injustices and things, and when you get to heaven, things will be better. Oh, no. He was about social justice and how to prepare this middle-class congregation to take a stand. And we talked so much about Gandhi. Martin was always amazed that I knew about Gandhi. I said at Lincoln High and at Antioch College, we had Americans who had went over to India and met Gandhi and worked with him and came back and talked to us at Lincoln and at Antioch. Oh, I know all about Gandhi. In fact, I knew about Gandhi before he did. He didn't know about him until Crozer Seminary, when the president of Howard University came and gave a lecture about him. And then after that, he went and read every book he could find on Gandhi. Because by the year 1947, British left India alone because of what Gandhi had done. Nonviolence, civil disobedience. The British were brutal and oppressive, but there was not one shot fired when the British let go of that country. So my husband wanted to marry the works of Gandhi with the teachings of Jesus Christ to bless those who despitefully use you, to love them who are your enemies. And so we talked about that, and sometimes with his sermons he would say, Coretta, what should be my first point? We'd think about it and toss back different ideas. And I was always typing up his sermons, but before Sunday, he had it memorized. He'd be in that pulpit by memory, no paper in front of him. It was a great year. Then I became pregnant, had our baby Yolanda, November, and 3 weeks later, life totally changed. Rosa Parks, she got on that bus after work. When you get on the bus in Montgomery, you get up and you walk up the steps, you put your dime in, you step back down, you walk to the back, you go up the steps, and you sit in the colored section. In Rosa Parks, she was right here behind the sign that says for coloreds only. There was someone here, a man here, and 2 other men here. And when the front started filling up with white people, and there was no more seats for this white man, not only did she have to get up, but everyone on that row had to get up too, according to the laws of segregation. And everybody else got up, and everybody in the back was saying, "Come on, Sister Rosa, come on, Mrs. Parks, get on up." But she refused. She was arrested, and when Martin got the call, he hesitated at first. It's like, is this what I should be doing? He was always questioning and wondering, is this the right thing and this is the right motive? But it didn't take him too long. He was out there at the honky-tonks, and he was passing out flyers, and he was going all over the place, passing out flyers. Over a year before, Joanne Gibson, a black woman who was a professor at Alabama State, she had already written up how to have a boycott of the buses. So they used all the things that she had written, and they put it into plan. It was only going to be one day on that Monday. Oh, Martin and I got up at 5:30 on that Monday morning, and we had our coffee and our toast. We looked out the window. The bus was empty that stops by our house. And then the next one was empty, and the next one was empty. Then Martin went and drove around to see if all of them would be empty of black people, because if every 10 people on that bus, 7 would be black. But not that day. Maybe 1 or 2, but not that day. Oh, people got their mules out. Giddy up, going off to work. They got their horse and their buggy. Some got their bikes. It was just a most beautiful thing to see. Our people, dignified, unified, proud. It didn't matter what the things were being thrown at them from the white people, from their cars, but they were proud, and they were walking to work. Oh, it was the most amazing and glorious thing to see. Martin was making sure there was at least 2 mass meetings a week so that people could be inspired, because we wanted to make sure it was nonviolent. I had the little baby, so I couldn't do as much as I wanted to do, but I could cook for the meetings. I was able to answer the phone, and at nighttime we could not answer the phone because the violence and the hatred poured through the telephone made it really difficult for us to get our rest. But Martin, he continued to preach nonviolence. Even the day he had to run home because our house had been bombed. I was sitting on the couch with another woman by the name of Mary, and Martin always had someone with me when he was not at home in the evenings. And we were sitting there talking, and I heard a car out front. Something hit the side of our house, and it rolled on our porch. Bang! Before that bang went out, I said, "Mary, let's get to the back." When we came back to the front, there was a hole in our front wall. The porch had been blown apart. The couch that we were sitting in was broken. The house was filled with smoke. We were fine. But the neighbors came with bats and broken bottles and guns and rifles, and they were ready to go and riot and find a white person. All before this, everything that Martin taught was a textbook. It was a sermon. But now, that we've been bombed, what's he going to say? He came home and he told everybody to go home, put your weapons down. Do not hate these white brothers. Love every single one of them. Go home. And we moved into somebody else's house. Well, Daddy King, when he heard about what happened, and then my father, Obadiah Scott, what happened, they both drove to where we were staying at. And if you ever had a chance to meet Daddy King, if he says jump, you say, how high? He has so much authority and power. And he was saying, correct, you must come home with me and bring the baby Yoki with me. And Martin, you need to stop being the president of the MIA, the Montgomery Improvement Association. You have to step down from that. You're going to have to come back and you could be assistant pastor at Ebenezer and we'll give you the same salary. He actually will give you even more of the salary. You must come back with me. I was standing there like, wow, I could go back to Atlanta where it's more safe. But no, I looked death, I looked violence in the eye that night, and I survived. And something inside of me made me realize that this is exactly where I needed to be. And Martin was next to me, and he was looking like a little scared schoolboy in front of his father. But he said no. And later that night, he called me his brave soldier. And he could not imagine me not being by his side. 381 days later, the bus was desegregated. The Supreme Court had gotten involved, and we were able to ride the bus. And when that bus stopped in front of our house, Martin got on, I got on, Rosa Parks, who had to run away from Montgomery because there were so many death threats on her. She and her husband and Ralph Abernathy, Edie Nixon, we all got on that bus, and that white bus driver said, oh, welcome, come on, it must be Dr. King. It was such a different spirit. Yes, and that was just the beginning. The next 12 to 13 years, what was our life was about, was a civil rights movement. And my husband said, do not hate, because it leads to tragic and neurotic responses. We must love. We must love our enemies, because love is the only thing that has redemptive power to transform those who hate us. And keep loving them, even though they're mistreating us. Because at some point, they're going to be a transition period. And they're going to feel guilt and shame about how they're treating you, and you're just treating them with love. And then they're going to mistreat you even worse. But then somehow they're going to be transformed because there's power in love.
I believe that even amid today's mortar burst and whining bullets, there is still hope for a brighter tomorrow. I have the audacity to believe that peoples everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their bodies, education and culture for their minds, and dignity, equality, and freedom for their spirits. I believe that what self-centered people have torn down, people other-centered can build up. When our days become dreary with low hovering clouds and our nights become darker than 1,000 midnights, we'll know that we are living in the creative turmoil of a genuine civilization struggling to be born.
Good evening. How's everybody? Jada, thank you for having me here, and thank you for coming this morning. Quite an event in Vallejo. And an awful lot of people were there. We had only 400 or 500 people. Yeah. So I was sitting here and I was just thinking about a few things. Which one? Is that better or is that worse? Okay. You know, it's interesting to think about the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King living in the South. How many of you were born and raised in the South? Alabama. Georgia, okay. Maryland. Any others? You guys weren't too bad over there. Not too. You had quite a few plantations, but you weren't too bad over there. Yeah. North Carolina, huh? We were focused in on Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Arkansas, Georgia. Oh, Georgia, Bull Connors in Georgia. And I can say this, and I'll share this with you. I was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis, Tennessee. Wow. 1958, we saw the death of Emmett Till. We saw the integration of the schools in Arkansas. That's one way to be in your life. I do know and have been and gone to the colored water fountain. And we had a zoo in Memphis. And black people could go on Thursdays. That's the only day you could go. So, I mean, I've seen it firsthand. I know what it's about. One thing people always say is Dr. Martin Luther King was the head of the SCLC. I had on a shirt this morning. It stated in NAACP, the boldest civil rights organization in the world. Been around the longest. We were founded in 1909. The situation was, and if you look at the pictures of the Edmund Pettus Bridge and the movement back then, the reason Dr. Martin Luther King was not the president of the NAACP, we had a president then, was because NAACP was banned in Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, and you could be arrested and thrown in jail if you were a card-carrying member of NAACP. But deep in their hearts, they collaborated, and that was a way of life. There was a lot of underground meetings going on. But the thing of it was, and that song, Keep Your Eye on the Prize. At some point in this life, we will have total integration. No longer will segregation be in the back of some people's mind. Let's hope. Let's hope. We do this, and as I was telling you this morning, was I telling the mayor? I'm telling the mayor. I'm remiss. I'm remiss. I take full blame. I'm the president of the local branch of NAACP, and Benicia is a part of our area. We have not been active over here. According to the mayor in our conversation, we will be here. The Vallejo branch encompasses Benicia, Vallejo, American Canyon, Napa, all the way up to England. And you've been busy. Trust me, we've been busy. And we will continue to be busy. We need each and every one of you. It's the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. At that time, it was 4. That's what black people were called. But our new president, our new CEO, a young man from Jackson, Mississippi, by the name of Derek Johnson, says, it's appropriate now because everybody is of color. We're all of color. It may be different color, but we're all people of color. And so I wish and hope that we can all come together and know each other as people. Because for me to hate you means that I'm very sick. And trust me, hate causes you more physical damage to your body and your mind than love. And I think we as people do a lot better, live a lot better in love. So.
We are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. Procrastination is still the thief of time. Life often leaves us standing bare, naked and dejected, the lost opportunity. We must move past indecision to action. If we do not act, we shall surely be dragged down the long, dark, and shameful corridors of time, reserved for those who possess power without compassion, might without morality, and strength without sight. Now let us begin. Now let us rededicate ourselves to the long and bitter but beautiful struggle for a new world.
When I think of peace, I think that peace starts within me first, and then it spreads out to my family, to community, to the world. And also when I think of that, this song comes to me. Pray for peace, pray for peace, pray for peace, please pray for peace. There's a power in the numbers of us praying here on earth. We're asking for a miracle. Let our voice be first. Pray for peace. Pray for peace. Pray for peace. Please pray for peace. We pray for peace. We pray for understanding. We pray for love. We pray for forgiveness. We pray. Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And peace cannot be kept by force. It can only be achieved by understanding. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Peace, true peace, not merely the absence of tension, the presence of justice. I want to kind of quote some thoughts of a prayer by Martin Luther King. It's, "Oh God, Make us willing to do your will, come what may, and increase the number of persons of goodwill and more sensitivity. Give us renewed confidence in nonviolence and the way of love taught by Christ. We thank you for your church, founded upon your word, that challenges us to do more than just sing and pray, but go out and work on walking the walk and talking the talk. And realize that humanity was created to shine like the stars, live all through eternity. Help us to walk together, sing together, pray together, live together until that day when all of God's children, black, white, red, brown, yellow, will rejoice in one common band of humanity. And so it is.
The anthem that we all recognize, and we recognize that it is an anthem that brings us our past up to the present, but it also brings us into the future, because there is still much to overcome, and there is still hope that lives among us. So I'd invite you to join hands. We'll project the words. You probably know them. I'll say them out before the next coming verse. And look around at these people that are next to you.
We